You know what that sound means? It's another episode of Game for a Movie where we ask, are you game for a movie? My name is Mike. I will be your host this evening. Just in time for Election Day, which is probably a week past at this point because, I'm always on top of the schedule. I've got a political thriller for you as the bad movie from 2011. But first, we've always got to drop what we are drinking. This time, it is from Resident Culture Brewing right here in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a beer called Motivations of the Heart. It is a West Coast style IPA, and it is 7% by volume. I like this a lot. I think this is very good. The beer itself, fantastic. What always gets me about Resident Culture is their cans are so freaking cool. Instead of like the silver, they use a black can, and this is very like abstract art on it. I very much like the can. It got me to buy it from the store without even trying it in the first place. And yeah, this is a good beer. Motivations of the Heart from Resident Culture is our beer while we talk about this bad movie tonight. One of the things I think I'm going to add to these episodes now, I talk a lot about the movie and everything like that, but I want to kind of like find a topic from that movie that I'm going to talk about at the end. And just, it's about film. It's about ideas like that from certain films, and especially these bad ones. I think a lot of them still have some things that are going for them. A lot of these conversations are probably going to be like where they thought they were going right that they went so wrong. Sometimes it's not going to be about that. This episode tonight is not going to be that conversation. We're going to have a very specific conversation relating to this film, which this film, if you have not read the title of this episode, is from 2011. It's called The Double. It has Richard Gere, Topher Grace, and Martin Sheen as your big names. It also has a few other recognizable faces that you will hear as I go into the details of the film itself. The Rotten Tomato score, if you don't know by now, I usually stick with something that's under 40% on both the critics and the audience score. The critic score was 22%. The audience score was 33%. So not very good numbers for The Double. It is PG-13 and it was released October 28th of 2011. It is an hour and 38 minutes long. The projected estimated budget was $13.5. So $13,500,000. The gross worldwide was $4,729,855. Not the best, is what I will say. But, they tried at least. A little bit about some of the people that were responsible for this movie. We've got Michael Brandt, who directed and wrote this film. Michael Brandt has been a writer and producer on several things. He's been a producer, an executive producer, and showrunner on things like Chicago Fire. He was the writer for 3:10 to Yuma and Wanted. He also has been an executive producer, because you can't just be on one, Chicago PD and Chicago Med. And then he was also the executive producer on Chicago Justice when that was a thing. Also, because this is personal to us at the podcast, he was the screenplay and story writer for Too Fast, Too Furious, very underrated Fast and the Furious film that you should definitely enjoy. And I just learned while also looking at his page, he is part of the screenplay for the in development Wanted 2 sequel coming out. I don't know if anybody wanted that, but they're apparently working on a sequel to the 2008 movie Wanted. His writing partner on this one is a guy named Derek Haas. Derek Haas has also worked with him on Too Fast, Too Furious, Wanted, The Double, the Chicago shows, and then he's done a couple episodes of FBI International. He is also one of the writers on Wanted 2, and then also coming up is Triple X4. Derek Haas is responsible for writing some of that. This movie was nominated for one award, that is the Saturn Award for Best DVD Release. It did not win in 2012, unfortunately, so that is its one nomination. We're going to get into details of this movie, but a little synopsis before we get started. This is what we are jumping in with. A retired CIA operative is paired with a young FBI agent to unravel the mystery of a senator's murder, with all signs pointing to a Soviet assassin. That's kind of why I wanted to watch it. With the election coming up and everything like that, I decided that I was going to watch this about 3 days before the election. the idea of political thriller was stuck in my head, so that's why I kind of wanted to watch it. And having Russian spies in this movie definitely felt like the right time for watching this movie. Some things never change with Russian spies and everything. Like I said, this movie's from 2011. It's still relevant today in 2024. So the idea of a political thriller with some Russian spies, that kind of thing, definitely was up my alley. So I had to watch it, obviously. So let's get down and dirty with the details of this film. I'm going to tell you everything about it just so you don't have to watch it, because I would hate for you to have to deal with that. And then I'm going to get into the discussion on this episode about this movie in particular. So we start, and the first thing to know is the production company is Image Nation Abu Dhabi. I just wanted you to know that. I don't think it has any reference, but at that time I wrote it down just in case it did ever come to be. We start in Sonora, Mexico, and there is a group of some Spanish people, like Mexican people, and then there's about 5 to 7 people in this group. You don't get an actual count, but about 5 to 7 people that are Russian. And they're trying to cross the border to start this movie, when all of a sudden a border patrol, like border security car, shows up and scares the group away. All the Mexican people rush off, but the Russians know this is their guy, and they jump in the car and drive off. Then we go to 6 months later. And let me tell you right now, that scene was not important at all. We just needed to see how they got into the U.S., and even that is just kind of glossed over. Now it sets up that we are watching these 2 FBI agents. They are spying on a guy named Darden. He is a senator, and he is played by Ed Kelly. He leaves his hotel, and while the FBI guys are watching, somebody comes around and kills him immediately. Like, it was really quick. Senator Darden is down. So these 2 guys that are FBI, they rush to the scene, basically set up a crime scene. And this is where we get introduced to Martin Sheen. Martin Sheen, he plays Highland, Director Highland. And he shows up to the crime scene. He gives a phone to one of the guys that was watching Senator Darden, and basically is told to call their director and let them know that Highland from the CIA is in charge. This is kind of, we have CIA, we have FBI kind of working together on this case. So Darden is a senator that was being watched by the FBI. Highland comes, and he is CIA, and he tells the director of the FBI, or tells the guy to tell the director of the FBI, he's taking over. The scene cuts to our main character, Richard Gere. He is playing Paul Shepherdson, and he is watching a Little League baseball game. There's nothing more American than watching a Little League baseball game. And he ends up talking to this woman about her son and everything like that. And when she asks, do you have any kids? He goes, no, I was just in the neighborhood. He's like sitting in the stands surrounded by the parents, and he's just hanging out, like watching these kids play baseball. It's really kind of creepy that nobody thought this was wrong. Maybe that's just my thought because it's Richard Gere too. Like, I don't know. Something about it just doesn't feel right. And this lady's just like, oh, okay, cool. He's just from the neighborhood and watching these kids play baseball, whatever. The lady also asks him the time, but he says to her he doesn't wear a watch. This is actually a little detail that I had to go back and write, because it does become a little more important to the story. So it feels like something that's kind of like a throwaway line, but truthfully, it ends up being a big deal. So we're assuming after the game, Paul Shepherdson walks back to his house, and waiting for him is Highland. Highland is in his house, and Highland seems to think that Cassius is responsible for the death of Senator Darden. And Paul is the go-to on Cassius, and he knows for a fact, like he knows Cassius is dead. We don't know anything else about Cassius until the next day. The next day, Paul ends up going to the CIA with Highland just to kind of like hear the intel about everything going on. We learn in this conversation that Paul is the expert on the Cassius 7. And the Cassius 7 are named after the Roman assassins who killed Caesar. he was responsible for catching 6 of the 7. So the only one that got away was Cassius, and Paul's convinced that he's dead. Like, Paul is convinced he's gone. There's no chance he's still around, anything like that. So he knows the 6 of the 7 were arrested. So he's just like, it's a done deal. We're done. But somebody else is a little more skeptical. This is Topher Grace's character of Ben Gere. Ben Gere is a recent recruit of the FBI. He is the young hotshot, and he has done the most work about Cassius now that Paul is retired, including he did his whole master's thesis on the Cassius 7, and that's how he got recruited to the FBI. Paul is still pretty certain. Like, he is certain Cassius is dead. Ben is a little more skeptical about it. So as Ben is like kind of calling out Paul about the fact that he may still be alive, Paul is like, dude, you're more a librarian than an agent. All you've done is research. You haven't been out in the field, that kind of thing. And then Highland lets them know that one of the 7 that was captured is still alive, nicknamed Brutus. And this is too much for Paul. Paul is like, no, Brutus isn't alive. I shot and killed him. But no, he actually is alive. He's in this super secret facility. And so Highland wants Paul and Ben to go to the facility and interview Brutus and learn if they know anything, if they can figure out anything more about Cassius and if he's alive or not. Paul at this point is like, no, I'm not doing this. No, Cassius is dead. I'm retired. It's done. This is no. But then he gets home and he sees a car on the street and he kind of is feeling like he's being watched. He doesn't know exactly if he is or not, but this is the moment I said that it looks like Paul is unretiring. And so remember how I said he didn't wear a watch? He grabs one from his safe that is like a really fancy watch and he puts it on. It's the next day and Paul meets Highland at a coffee stand that's across the street from the White House. And basically Highland gives him an ultimatum. He says, if you're going to unretire, I need you just to either prove that Cassius is dead or to find out if he did it. So Paul is now on the case and he is partnered with the new FBI kid, Ben Gere. Then we get a 1988 flashback to the American Embassy in Paris. This flashback just shows that Paul knows how to take down the 7 and that he went to Highland's office to tell him how to do it and that Highland's just like, okay, we're going to base our careers on this. Now it's back to present day. Ben Gere gets a call and is told basically you're no longer a librarian, you're jumping in the field. So now we got Paul and Ben and they're just kind of the odd couple. You know, they're working together and one's the grizzled vet. The other is the like green rookie. He's like excitement in his eyes. He's ready to take down Cassius and make a name for himself. And then Paul's just kind of like, you're putting all your eggs in the wrong basket, kid. Like, this isn't going to work. While they're driving to the prison that Brutus is in, basically Ben questions why they never told Paul about Brutus. And truthfully, what he says is that he would kill him. It's pretty obvious. That's why they didn't tell him, because they wanted to try to get more information eventually out of him, and they know if they told Paul, Paul would kill him. So Brutus in the prison, he is played by Stephen Moyer. Stephen Moyer's main claim to fame, he was in 81 episodes of True Blood, but really that's about it. So you may know him from True Blood. That's kind of really it. There's not much else you might know him from. But Brutus, he is in the prison, and Paul lets Ben do the interview. Paul also brings into the jail cell. He knows that Brutus would want a radio. So if he talks, they're going to offer him this radio, like it's a boombox kind of thing. And so Ben leads the charge talking Russian to Brutus, which Brutus then says in Russian, just because I wanted to include this, your mother is a whore. Brutus obviously doesn't remember Paul at first, but Paul's just kind of sitting in the background, not really saying anything and just kind of like hiding in the shadows. Ben offers him the radio and says, I will give this to you if you can tell me anything about Cassius. And so we get a little kind of flashback where Brutus talks about how the 7 became trained, forced to kill each other because there were 12 before. And I say they're 12. the Cassius 7 is Cassius and then 6 other guys. And there was 12 recruits, and the 12 recruits became 6 because they killed each other. Brutus admits that they use wires and not knives. And so all of a sudden something clicks with Ben that, oh, it was a wire that he's used to kill all of his like opposition and everything like that. It wasn't a knife or anything. So one of the things is that he went back and thought about was Senator Darden. His throat was slit and everybody was thinking knife, but really it was a sharp ass wire. Brutus is like giving all this stuff kind of up. It's, you know, he's still holding a little back and everything like that. And Paul like cuts the convo short and is just like, all right, we got to get out of here now. Gives him the radio. And Ben is kind of miffed, but follows along because he's thinking, oh, you're the veteran. Okay, I'll just follow you along. Brutus plays the radio for a little bit. He's playing the tape that's in it, and it's exactly what he wanted to hear. And then he opens the boombox. He takes the batteries out of the radio, and he swallows them whole. And this triggers a reaction for Brutus, and he ends up in the medical ward. And so while he's like getting situated and everything like that, he pukes up these batteries, and then he's able to get the jump on the doctors and security and kills the doctors, holding security at gunpoint, that kind of stuff, and gets to the parking garage. When he gets to the parking garage, he thinks he's all clear, and then he steps on a battery. And so he looks down and realizes that it's a battery, and Paul is behind him. Paul knew he was going to do this, so he like is able to grab him and tell Brutus who he is. He's the guy who shot him in Salzburg, and he's also the guy who trained him in Moscow. Yes, Paul is Cassius. We get this big reveal early on that Paul is Cassius. Brutus tries to stab Paul, but he's like too quick, and he pulls a wire through Brutus's neck, killing him. And after he kills him, you see the wire go back into Paul's watch. It's retractable, like it winds around and everything like that. This is what the big deal was about the watch. So we now know very early on that Paul is Cassius, and that he has been doing all the killings and everything like that, and that his weapon is a wire that comes from his watch. After killing Brutus, he goes and watches Ben at his house, like just kind of like checking up on him. And it seems like he's going to like kill him at first. Like he kind of gets ready to kill him, but he sees Ben's wife, and he seems to feel some kind of remorse or something like that, so he doesn't pursue. That night when Paul gets home, he has a flashback in his dreams where he remembers killing his first target in Paris. It was one of the 7. And he wakes up in like a sweat and calls Ben and says that they need to meet. They meet at the reflection pond, is what I'm thinking is what they tried to set up. This movie was filmed in Detroit, so there's a lot of buildings that you kind of see, like the GM headquarters, and it's just kind of reflected in like the water. And so it's definitely like a mistake, but whatever. They're trying to set it up that it's the reflecting pool in front of the Washington Monument. Who cares? I don't really care. I just now am pointing it out because it is definitely a goof on that point. But basically, Ben and Paul meet, and he tells Ben to drop the investigation because Cassius doesn't care who he has to kill. And now that we know he's Cassius, he's trying to more so protect him and say that he doesn't want to kill him. But of course, Ben doesn't want to. He just wants to put him away for good. He wants that first big catch, and he wants to be known as the guy who put Cassius away. So they're in public. It's a very public area. Paul can't do anything about it. He'd already said he wanted him to stop, but he's not going to stop. So whatever, they go their separate ways. Ben goes back to his office, and he's doing some research. He's back to librarian mode. He also has a buddy there that's like kind of helping him out. That guy's name is Oliver. Oliver, not a big deal. We don't really know who the actor is, anything like that. Not that big a deal. But basically, Ben is kind of working with Oliver, and then he gets a call. And basically, Ben is told that Brutus has been killed with a wire. So Ben goes over to the crime scene to try to see everything that happened. He's like walking through this, seeing what Brutus did to escape. And the entire time, Paul is like kind of right behind him in the shadows, kind of watching over him. Paul makes himself known that he just got there and everything like that. Just kind of like seeing what Ben knows. He wants to kind of pick his brain. And Ben talks about the fact that Cassius shows up to all of his crimes after. He likes to be there and everything. So Ben starts studying the crowd, and he sees a man in a brown coat. And once he sees this guy in the brown coat, the guy in the brown coat takes off. And so there's a foot chase to like a maze of a trash heap. You know, this is like a garbage waste area. There's tons of trash on top of each other. It creates it's a maze essentially to get lost in. So Paul tells them to split up to chase this guy with the brown coat. This is one of the things I have with this movie. When Paul tells them to split up, yes, it makes sense in the standpoint that Paul kind of wants to kill this guy. And at the same time, like Paul being the CIA veteran agent who thinks that Ben shouldn't be out in the field because he's too young, too green, that kind of thing. It doesn't make sense they would leave him on his own as that guy, in my mind. Now, thinking of it in the way of Cassius / Paul wants Ben to kind of like get caught and die. Maybe that's what it is, that kind of thing. I don't know. Maybe not. So Paul doesn't get to the guy in the brown coat before Ben does. Now, the guy in the brown coat does get away, and Paul and Ben kind of reconvene, and Paul's just like, it's got to be our guy. It's got to be our guy, trying to deflect blame. And Ben goes, no, he's not our guy. He definitely wasn't the guy. I just wanted to arrest him and see what he knew. So that's it for the day after Brutus gets murdered. Paul is then invited over to Ben's house. And that's where we meet Natalie. Natalie is Ben's wife, and she's played by Odette Annable. Annable, maybe? Maybe Annable. Annable. That's what it is. I don't know. So, Odette has been in movies like Cloverfield. There's You Again. She was in 60 episodes of the Walker, Texas Ranger reboot. 24 episodes of Supergirl. She's been around, especially like TV. She's been around. So I don't know if this was a line or not when Natalie meets Paul, but she says, let us welcome you to our humble commode. I don't know if that's what she was meant to say, but that's definitely what she did say. It didn't make sense in my mind. I don't know. I wasn't fully focused on this conversation, but So as they're coming in, Ben asks, hey, what can I get you to drink? And Paul says a vodka martini with an onion. And Ben goes, hey, that's Cassius's drink. And he basically says, oh, yeah, like I wanted to get in his shoes and I started drinking them and I kind of like them now. So Ben also makes himself one so that he's kind of thinking like, oh, yeah, I want to learn about him too. I want to get into his shoes, so I'll follow in your footsteps, which is really Cassius's footsteps. As they're having this conversation at dinner and everything like that, we learn why Ben has put so much of his career into chasing Cassius and the Cassius 7. Ben respects Cassius because he's the best at something. And Ben doesn't feel like he's the best at anything, and so that's kind of why he's following him. And Paul tells him not to respect him because Cassius is a cold-blooded killer, and the best thing he did was disappear. And this is kind of like a metaphor for himself. He's glad that he retired and got out of there, and this was the best thing for him. So Ben, after this conversation, all of a sudden has to pee and walks away, and Paul lets Natalie know that Cassius definitely knows about her husband, and he needs to be careful what he's messing with, and is more so through Natalie trying to get him to drop the case again. Again, it seems like kind of not exactly takes a liking to, but he just doesn't want to see this young kid get killed, and especially at his own hand, because he doesn't want to blow his cover. So after a wonderful evening like this, Paul goes home, and when he gets there, he notices that the car that was outside his house watching him the other day, no longer there. So he's feeling a little better about it. Maybe they're not like right on his tail anymore, especially with the brown coat guy in the wind. Like this could be the moment where, okay, he can get away with this because maybe if he finds this brown coat guy, he can blame him, say, hey, I found Cassius. He's dead. So while Paul's getting a good night's sleep, let's take a little break to tell you about the podcast that guessed the bad movie first. It is Screen Nerds Podcast that has been featured on this show before. It is a podcast for film lovers by film lovers. From quick screen reviews of new films to rescreen reviews of favorite films, celebrate them all here with the Screen Nerds Podcast. Congratulations to them. You can follow them on X/Twitter/whatever at Screen Nerds Pod. They also, I'm pretty sure, are on Blue Sky and Threads. You know, those other things if X/Twitter is not really your thing. It looks like their last episode was about Juror Number 2, the new Clint Eastwood film starring Nicholas Hoult, Toni Collette, J.K. Simmons, and Kiefer Sutherland. I have a lot of interest in that film. I'm probably going to check it out, and then I will probably listen to the Screen Nerds Podcast talk about it. So the Screen Nerds Podcast, congratulations to you guys for guessing the double correctly first, as the podcast to guess it first. Shout out to you. And let's get back to when Paul wakes up from his nice little sleep with nobody watching him. So it's the next day, and they go back to the briefing room that was at the start of this movie, the CIA briefing room, and they get told about the Russians who snuck across the border, including Boslovsky. Boslovsky is a ghost pretty much, and he's never been caught. And so Paul's kind of throwing it like, okay, we've got this Boslovsky. You know, there's some times where there's some overlap. He knows that Boslovsky is part of this and everything like that. So he starts to convince everyone that Boslovsky is Cassius. So Paul has a lead where he can try to figure out where this guy is. And so Paul and Ben go to this project house where Paul goes into the secret room, but Ben isn't allowed in there. And so there's like this long wait. You wait with Ben outside of the room versus Paul, who's like getting the name. And so he comes back out and he gets the name Amber. And so Paul has dealt with Amber before and knows that she's a prostitute. And so Ben like asks him like, wait, Amber's a prostitute? And Paul goes, if the Russians use their women instead of missiles, we'd all be wearing fuzzy hats right now. This is the best line of the film. Because it's true. Let's face it. And especially because Amber is Stana Katic. Stana Katic. I think I'm saying that right, actually. I was like questioning myself. I think I actually got it this time. Stana Katic, who you may recognize from Castle. She is the detective in the Castle series. Gorgeous. Let's just call it what it is. She is absolutely fantastic looking. I'm not afraid to say that. She also, besides playing Kate Beckett in Castle, she also has played Lois Lane in Superman Unbound. Lots of voice roles. She's Wonder Woman in a lot of the DC animated movies. She's definitely going to the voice role versus like on screen. And she was also in Quantum of Solace. I forgot that as well. But yeah, so Stanya Katic is Amber, the prostitute who is Russian. And so they go to this trailer park by the river. And basically, Paul gets out first and says, we're looking for Amber. And her neighbor at first is like, no, I'm not going to help you, anything like that. And so then they get told that her trailer is the closest to the river. So Ben goes into the trailer and tries to figure out anything / find if Amber's there. And Amber sneaks out the back. And Paul rushes after her, is able to grab her and like throws her into the river and holds her at gunpoint. And he threatens to shoot her and dump her in the river. But Ben convinces him to let him talk to her. Paul kind of goes over the edge, and Ben's kind of like the good cop to his bad cop. So Paul lets Ben talk to her. And to like make a connection with her, Ben shows a picture of his kids and then gives her a phone and says, can you help us find this Buzzlowski? She calls Leo. Leo is Amber's brother. Leo is played by Yuri Sardarov. And Yuri Sardarov, the main thing you'd recognize him from, and the main thing I know him from, is Chicago Fire. He plays Brian Zvanacek in Chicago Fire and PD and Medical, all of the crossovers, everything like that. He's also in the movie Argo. He's also in the Ides of March movie. He's been in a lot of stuff. He also has, he had a role in FBI International. He was in 2 episodes of The Rookie. He's making all of these like stops on these TV shows. And this is definitely, he must have a working connection with the writers and director, because remember how I said those guys have been writing or executive producing for Chicago PD, Chicago Med, that kind of stuff. So this guy has a little bit of, he's worked with them before. So Leo comes to try to help Amber. And when he does, he is bombarded by both Ben and Paul. And basically they say, we're looking for Buzzlowski. He goes, I can help you get to him. And Paul then says, he's becoming more and more slightly unhinged. Paul says, if you're lying, I will shoot her in the head and then you. So they hop into a car with Yuri, and Yuri takes Paul and Ben to this factory, like it's an abandoned factory. Paul is following Yuri in, and he tells Ben to watch the door. Again, this is showing that Paul's trying to get some separation from Ben. Part of it might be to protect him. Part of it might be to kill Buzzlowski and then say, oh, he pulled the gun on me. He is Cassius. It's over now. You know, that kind of thing. Leo takes Paul to this like control room in the middle of the factory. And wouldn't you know it, he was true to his word. Buzzlowski is there. Paul says to him that he's there because they think Buzzlowski is Cassius. And when he does that, Leo pulls a gun on Paul and has it at the back of his head. And Buzzlowski is kind of like laughing, you know, and he tells him he becomes Cassius if they need him to be. So he's been kind of like pretending to be Cassius when Cassius can't be found. And so he's like the big guy in charge when they can't find the actual big guy. So Paul, while being held at gunpoint, tells Buzzlowski that he is Cassius. And he is able to grab Leo's gun and then fire at Buzzlowski. Buzzlowski gets away, but Paul pulls his wire and kills Leo like immediately, one fell swoop. And because the gunshots have been fired, Ben hears them and he's trying to run upstairs and he finds Leo's body. Paul is chasing after Buzzlowski, who ends up giving him the slip. And Paul is trying to decide now if he goes back or if he keeps going. And so Paul goes and drives away. Ben, while he's like analyzing Leo's body, kind of realizes, wait, Leo was killed by a wire. Is Paul Cassius? Like it's starting to click all of a sudden, slowly but surely. So he goes back to his office, brings his buddy Oliver more in on this, mostly because his buddy is good at tracking people. That's one of his specialties. So he reveals to Oliver that he thinks Paul might be Cassius. This also then goes to Natalie, who works at the bookshop. And Paul shows up and basically like saves her from falling off a ladder. And so she's like happy to see him and everything like that. And Paul tells her like, get Ben to ask off the case because he's getting very close to this dangerous man. Again, trying to get him to drop the case because he knows if he goes any further, he's going to have to kill him. Like this is too close. He's now at that point where if Ben doesn't drop it, he's going to have to kill Ben. Natalie gets a little like weirded out by it, but says that she will tell him to drop the case. Oliver and Ben have put together this like crime board at the same time. And in all of the pictures of the Cassius crimes, Paul is in each one. And that's the logic Ben jumps to about, remember how he said that Cassius likes to go and revisit all of his crimes? So Paul being there, makes sense. This is obvious him. But he also was like the CIA agent in charge of that case. So it's like, is he really Cassius? Like this is the question I'm asking. He's certain, like he knows now that Paul is Cassius. But in my mind, like he would be there anyway. Even if he wasn't Cassius, he'd be there because he's the CIA agent in charge of the case. So why is this the like logic that he is definitely Cassius? I don't know. He's certain now, and so now he doesn't know. Does Paul know that Ben knows? Does Ben know that Paul knows? That kind of thing. Like it's a cat and mouse game right now. So Ben does like an obvious drop of information that Paul sees and grabs. Also, Ben then goes home and says his goodbyes to his family. Says goodbye to Natalie, says goodbye to their infant son. He is going to try to finish this case. And Natalie tries to talk him out of it, but he's just like, no, I'm too close now. I need to do this. I need to get it done. Otherwise, I'm never going to be able to sleep. That kind of thing. I'm never going to be able to live with myself. So after he says his goodbyes, he gets to his car, and on his windshield is a picture left there. And this picture is of Paul, this woman, and this child. And so Ben's just like, who is this? I've got to get back to the office and do more research. And this is where he gets to Geneva, 1988. In Geneva, 1988, Boslovsky killed Paul's wife and son. And so Paul created Cassius to get revenge and kill the seven. So basically, he brought like the worst of the worst together, and he was taking them all out one by one because he wanted revenge for his wife and son. And one of those people was supposed to be Boslovsky. Ben goes back to this project house that we got the name Amber from, and he goes in and he figures out where Paul went. Again, we don't see in this project house, so who knows what information he gets, how he gets it, whatever. So Boslovsky is at a port, and Paul is watching him. Basically, Boslovsky is waiting for a shipment to get in, and so Paul, like, gets caught looking at him, and Boslovsky gets in a car, and they go on this huge car chase. And it's around the port, like, over and over and over again. It's like 3 or 4 times around the port, and the car chase ends with Paul's car flipping, and Boslovsky able to get out and hold Paul at gunpoint. Because movie has to movie, and we know that Paul's not going to die at this point, Ben gets there just in the nick of time to like hold his gun at Boslovsky and shoot at him, missing, but he stopped Paul from getting killed, and Boslovsky runs away. Instead of chasing after him, Ben calls out Paul in the middle of the port, and they're about to have this big reveal. You know, Paul is about to reveal that he's Cassius to Ben. That's what we think is the big reveal. No, the big reveal is that the drop Ben tried to make is a 30-year-old Soviet code. And Paul now knows that Ben is a double agent from Russia and was recently activated. He was the one that killed the senator to lure Cassius out. And basically what he was told is he needs to clear the country out for the new arrival of spies from Russia. With Cassius alive, Russia believes that he is going to continue to kill their spies. So he needed to get Cassius out and basically clear the way so all these spies could come from Russia. He also admitted that he was supposed to capture Cassius and bring him back to Moscow tonight. Paul's at a disadvantage. Ben's got the gun, and Paul is like injured because of his car chase and everything like that. Instead of grabbing Paul and going to Moscow, Ben decides that he can convince them that Boslovsky is Cassius. Basically, turn the other cheek and say, well, if we kill Boslovsky, he is kind of Cassius, you know, so now they can work together. Team up, bros, you know, that kind of thing. Boslovsky is hurt, and he is cornered in the port. Ben is looking for him while Paul is looking at the camera feed to try to figure out where he is. Ben sees like this body down and goes to look at it, but Paul sees that Boslovsky is like hiding in the shadows waiting for him. So as soon as Ben gets to a certain level, Boz is going to like jump out. Paul catches Boz's attention, but he does get shot. Now Ben has a chance, and he turns around, but he gets kneed in the nuts. So Ben is crumpled on the ground. Paul, even though he's been shot, and Boz, even though he's injured, they get into this fist fight. Ben collects his breath and his gun, but he doesn't shoot Paul, the real Cassius. And then basically he lets them fight it out. Because one of these two guys is probably going to die, and that's the one he's going to try to convince Russia is Cassius. So either way, he's going to look like a hero, you know? So he doesn't shoot. He just holds the gun up. And Paul is able to wrap his wire around Boslovsky's neck and kill him. Then he tells Ben to go home. Like, you don't have to go to Russia, go home. And he succumbs to his wounds and dies. When the group gets there, basically Ben is like still on the ground kind of thing, but he's able to explain how the wire came out of the watch. However, what we didn't see him do and what didn't happen on camera is Ben was able to switch the watch from Paul's wrist to Boslovsky's. So he's able to convince most of the people that Boslovsky is Cassius. Hyland is definitely like skeptical. Like he definitely is like, no, this doesn't make sense. But instead of digging deeper, I think he was kind of like okay with the fact that, look, both of them are dead. I'd rather just let Paul be a hero and not dig any deeper. So Ben says they were, Boslovsky was waiting for a ship and they go explore it. And basically there's just a ton of weapons that were on this ship, like a ton. So all these Russian spies were going to get all these weapons and everything like that. So Ben's a hero. He saved the day. He killed Cassius, who they think is Boslovsky. Cassius, the real Cassius, is dead. Now he needs to figure out what he's going to do. Is he going to go to Moscow and tell them that Cassius is dead, or is he going to go back to his family? As he's walking away, Hyland turns and asks him if he would work for the CIA. Because remember, he's FBI. But it also is very unclear. It seems more so like Hyland's asking him, do you want to work for the Americans versus like the Russians? Like he's offering him this life in America versus with the Russians. And maybe I'm reading way into this movie. I don't know if this is actually what it was or anything like that. It's very unclear. But that's the way I took it, was that he was offering him a chance to work with the Americans. He kind of pieced together that he was Russian. So maybe that was the chance. I don't know. So he says, maybe I'll let you know tomorrow. And though he's a Russian double agent and everything like that, Ben decides he likes his life. He goes back to Natalie and his newborn and everything like that. So he is, at least for now, going to stay on American soil. The end. So that's the double. Like I said, I have a conversation starter about this, but first I'll get the important stuff out of the way. 1 out of 5. That's what I got. 1 out of 5, like wires from watch kind of thing. Is it awful? No. Is it life-changing? No. Richard Gere, especially, he went like the subtle route in this, and then Topher Grace is kind of just Topher Gracing. It's not Shakespeare. It's not like this super intense political thriller, but it was fine enough. I think what definitely ruins part of it is revealing that Ben is also a secret agent, also like a double agent, and that the reason he did his master's thesis was to draw him out of hiding, to get to the FBI. He killed the senator, like that kind of stuff. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Fine, whatever. I mean, like, I'm willing to suspend that. Overall, it could have been worse. I definitely have it in the realm of movies like Edison that I've watched for this podcast. Edison was not great, but there are much worse movies out there. So I think this was fine. I don't think this is life-changing. I don't think this is anything that's like, oh yeah, you should definitely watch this movie. But overall, it was fine. So I'll say 1 out of 5. wires out of a watch, that kind of thing. My thought and what I wanted to start this conversation was about this. I liked the idea that we knew very early on that Paul was Cassius. Obviously, they didn't feel comfortable enough with that, so they did the second twist that Ben was also a double agent. But I liked the idea if there was no other twist, if Ben just learned that Paul was Cassius, I think that was better for the movie overall. And I like the idea that we kind of knew ahead of time. And so some of these things that he was doing, you kind of had more of like a question towards him. You know, it was kind of like, okay, is he telling Ben to split up because he's trying to protect him? Or is it because he really does want him to get killed? And he doesn't want that blood on his hands. Like, he thinks he's scot-free because the guy in the brown coat killed him, you know, that kind of thing. Overall, I think that worked a lot better for this movie. And I wanted to bring up the fact, I don't know if that could work with a lot of movies. I think it would have worked really well for this movie if they would have done it that way instead, where they didn't need a second twist like that. I think the biggest part of the climax was supposed to be Ben figuring out that Paul was Cassius. And truthfully, it was. Like, it was a big point in that movie where all of a sudden he kind of realizes. And even though I told you I had my gripes about the fact that, yes, Paul would have been at these scenes anyway, so why did that automatically make him Cassius? I don't know if that was a big deal, but I think it was a very cool moment when he finally realizes, yeah, I might be working with the bad guy. So I like that idea. I thought that was a great idea. I want to know from you guys that are listening to this, do you know of any other movies that do stuff like that where you know very early on? I think it works. I really do. It does make it kind of feel like a procedural crime show a little bit, where like you know the bad guy, but you know the main characters don't know. But at the same time, I think it worked for this movie, even though Richard Gere's performance was kind of a little hollow and a little bit more like subtle, and I don't think it worked very well. It does also add a little drama with these scenes where like Leo takes him to meet Boslovsky, and Boslovsky doesn't know that he's Cassius. And that's another thing. Boslovsky doesn't know that he's Cassius, you know, that kind of thing. So it does add a little drama to this because, like, to them, they're going, this guy's not Cassius. And then all of a sudden he's whipping around, shooting at you with Leo's gun, and then kills Leo with a wire from his watch, you know? So I think it worked in this aspect of, like, revealing this early. I know sometimes a lot of movies that's not going to be the case, but for me, that worked in this one. I want to know if you guys think that more movies should try this. Do you think this is a good idea? I don't know if it's a good idea for all movies, but certain movies, maybe. There's certain movies that come to mind immediately that I think it was better that you didn't know. But then there's also some movies that I think it would be kind of better if you did know. The one that's stuck in my head right now is Mission Impossible Fallout. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen it. Henry Cavill being a double agent kind of thing. I actually think it might work with that movie. Even though Fallout was great the way it was, I think it could have worked either way. So, I don't know. That's my idea with this one. I'm trying to think of other movies where I think it could have worked like that. So, overall, that's my thoughts on this. Like, this is the conversation I wanted to have, that I think it worked for this one in particular. I'm trying to find something positive about this movie like this to talk about, because like I can focus on all the bad, everything about it. But the good from this, I think that other things could take from this, was revealing early on that Paul was the double agent. They shot themselves on the foot by making Ben a double agent as well. And like the performances aren't the best, but you know, it could have been a lot worse. That's what I'll say. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on the double. If you guys have seen this, let me know. Are there other bad political thrillers that I should include later on in the show, especially when it comes to November like this? There's going to be more election days, that kind of thing. But yeah, so that's my thoughts on The Double. Could have been worse, could have been better, could have been a lot of things. So, is it a good movie? No. Is it the worst thing? No. I'm not going to watch it again, but if you haven't seen it and you want to watch it, I think you could watch it and find something enjoyable out of it. Is it amazing? No. But you could find something that you'd find enjoyable about it. I think there's a lot of things about it that it did pretty okay. The big thing being that we knew he was Cassius from the start. I think that was good overall. I like the idea of the Cassius 7, that whole cell of Russian spies that are modeled after the Roman assassins of Caesar. I think that's a good idea. I almost wish we would have seen more of that, though, because really all we saw was Baslovsky getting killed and then Brutus, and that's really it. We really didn't see anything more than that, and I think that would have been kind of fun, too, to see, even if it was flashback. I'm normally not a flashback guy, but I think to see how Cassius handled each of these guys, or at least some of them, one or two more, the power of three, where we see 3 of these 7 get killed. I think that would have been kind of fun to see as well, just to give you more detail about Paul/Cassius's mission, why he did the things he did. It was revenge, but it also was so that nobody knew who he was. Nobody could trace it back to him, that kind of thing. So, I don't know. That's my thoughts on The Double. Yeah. So, if you guys have thoughts, hit us up anywhere. We're on Blue Sky and Threads now. We're on Hive Social, even though I don't think that one's taking off as much, but we're on there as well. So you can find us anywhere at Game for a Movie. Yeah. So use the hashtag GFAM if you're wanting to get in on the conversation. We can find you that way as well. So hashtag GFAM. And yeah, we will see you guys next time on the Game for a Movie podcast, where we ask, are you game for a movie? I've been Mike, your host. You have listened to me talk about The Double from 2011, and we will see you next time, unless we're a Russian spy and we need to get back to Moscow. Or not. Double agents. Bye.